As always, it is my absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, Cam Sutton, 8 games, the suspension on this, which I still maintain to this day, if they'd done that with Ray Rice originally, and because they knew what the video looked like, this one didn't have video. What was your thought on how the NFL handled
it? Stealthily.
Yes, stealth.
Perhaps a bit with a bit more savvy.
Yes.
Then probably a good idea to do it around a holiday weekend. It's had kind of somewhat of a news dump feel to it, but not to make light of the situation. I mean, he's in a good amount of trouble. I would guess there's something there to suggest it's not as severe as it's going to be made out to be, at least in the eyes of the law, not the public. But 8 games, that's definitely on the higher end of the spectrum for what they would do. And obviously, the Steelers knew this was going to happen. And at that point, it's from a transactional standpoint, it's bargain shopping. You get 8 games at the end of the year, plus maybe the playoffs of a good, experienced NFL corner who knows what you're doing defensively at half the price of the minimum contract. So you see from their perspective why they did it, knowing the suspension was coming. From the league's perspective, they probably pushed for that, if not more, just considering the pretty extreme nature of what he's accused of. Usually my thought is it's the least they can do, and it kind of is in that sense. But a messy potential situation that I think generated a lot more negative attention toward the NFL than it has in the past. And you brought up the classic example of it, their inability to get ahead of the Ray Rice situation. And I'd be remiss if you didn't point out Baltimore's involvement in that. The way they handled that was a lesson in what not to do moving forward. And I think the NFL, as well as the Lions, saw the potential issues that are going to come from this. And from that point, if they can't bar Sutton from playing exactly without creating an even bigger problem for themselves. If that's the case, though, then maybe Pittsburgh is the right place to kind of let him serve that suspension in an effort to move past it from their perspective as quickly as they can. Some people will say that that's not the right way to go about it. Well, the NFL isn't a federal court. It's not their job to do that. Whatever additional punishment that Sutton's going to get, we'll find out. Maybe that's not the end of suspensions or time away or anything like that he'll have to serve. But for now, it's the punishment. I think that I probably would have bet that that's what he would get, but I still feel like it's probably not enough to needing to send a stronger message. The fact that he did what he did is alleged to have done is horrific in and of itself. But the fact that he then evaded police for 3 weeks, right. I really think is that's a problem for me. I get the value that he poses to the Steelers, but I feel like you can probably find another cornerback somewhere. That's just my opinion.
So that brings up the next part. Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin are smart people, so they knew in some form. They didn't know what length they would be in terms of the suspension, but they knew in some form they wouldn't have them initially. So where do they look? Say it plays out to be 8 games, right? That's what it plays out to be. So they have to go through the first half of the season without him. So where do you see the Steelers compensating for him not being there for the first 2 months of the season?
Well, oddly enough, I think you go back to the Kevin Colbert playbook. They love the pre-free agency, somewhat veteran cornerback, with some experience but still cheap. And I'll be honest, I watch a lot of football. I read a lot of football. I study it probably more than what is healthy. They usually find a guy you've never heard of before to come in and play snaps for them. The success rate of that strategy aside, that's just typically what they do. I mean, going back to the Brandon Boykin trade, Bryce McCain was a good player they brought in. I know everybody absolutely hated Antoine Blake, but considering the price that they paid for him, they got a lot of good run out of him. Mike Hilton's done a phenomenal job. The Steelers resurrected his career. There are a lot of defensive backs that get washed out one place or another. It's a really hard position to play. Yeah. There are veterans on, who would be on very affordable terms who are going to be available. This is right now just isn't a great time for signings. And to your point, yes, they absolutely knew a suspension was coming. It was a question of how long. I think it's just more like we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We have our eyes on these guys. Maybe it's this guy who's coming off surgery. We just want to be able to get a check on it, a little closer to the day. They'll make a move. Defensive back is probably the most active position during training camp to replace that and running back. There are guys that come in and out at those positions all the time. And certainly in the NFL, we've seen success. Obviously a lot of failure as well, but we've seen success all over the spectrum of transactions in the NFL. Top 5 draft picks, 7th round draft picks, undrafted veterans that did nothing with 2 teams that, picked on somewhere else because of a schematic advantage they might have. Things like that. They have their eyes on the people that they want. I think even before Cam Sutton, the idea was they need to add somebody, to at least provide some depth at cornerback in particular, maybe, a multifaceted defensive back. I did not think they would get through training camp just with their depth chart going into it. They were planning on adding somebody. Maybe they add somebody after cuts. They're always open to those kinds of things. I think that's the path they'll go down now and try to figure it out. Get used to the idea that Sutton's not going to be there, but he's somebody that they want to play significant snaps late in the season. And now they have, a sense of how exactly long that's going to be, and a more clearer picture of what their options are.
I think we've established over time that you extensively cover the Steelers in the NFL, but you do it from Minnesota. Kyrie Jackson, the 4th round pick of the Vikings, was killed in a car crash in Maryland over the weekend that also took the life of former Penn State defensive back A.J. Litton. He was in the car with him. Jackson had gone to Alabama, he'd gone to Oregon, he ended up being a 4th round pick. AJ had been at Florida State, then transferred here, and did a lot of work, especially on special teams and at corner here. What has the depth of just the sorrow in Minnesota over what happened to him? And for the Vikings, that was a guy, you don't get drafted in the 4th round unless they have some plans for you somewhere. And what does that do to their plans once they overcome the intense grief?
You brought up Cam Sutton. That's the first thing I thought of, because a well-respected scout that I know within the league, associated with the Vikings. I remember what he told me, what he thought of Jackson was he thought he could be a Cam Sutton type. It was obviously a tragedy. The whole thing is just it's gut wrenching. Anybody you talk to about Kyrie Jackson, A+ character kid. Yes. Everybody liked him. Everybody gravitated toward him. You could see why he had the success that he had, not just because he's obviously an excellent athlete, a very strong technical defensive back, but he's just one of those people that finds a way to do what he needs to do to be successful. And it's such a great attitude. I know inside the locker room, the coaching staff, the front office are gutted. They loved him. Yeah. I would agree. And it's interesting because, people will say, well, how big of a deal could it be if he was a 4th round pick? But you don't understand. They're not drafting 1 through 245 or whatever it is.
That's right.
On ability. It's not like number 9 is automatically better than number 13.
Right.
that's not how they divide it up. If you're a fourth-round guy, there are reasons that might not be necessarily skill-related. Not the best athlete, not the biggest cornerback who's out there. He probably fits the mold of a third, fourth-round defensive back in the NFL. They saw him as being a very effective slot corner. Now, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem teams put a high level of value on a slot cornerback nowadays. They felt he was a player. He would have gotten a lot of snaps this season. They were going to count on him for a lot of things. They wanted to see how he looked in camp and move him along with what they saw in the defense. But he was going to be a guy who played a lot for him. They were going to ask him to do a lot of things, and they felt he could take it. He just needed to work his way into the NFL. They were going to give him some time and some room to do that. But they're gutted. It's a tremendous loss for a variety of reasons. Lower on the list is the impact that he would have had on the Vikings on the field. But to see 3 lives lost in such a situation, it's heartbreaking. Really, it's hard for teams to recover from that. You can see the Andrea Kramer story on ESPN coming up with Kevin O'Connell about how the Vikings managed to handle that and deal with that. Football players are not at their best on the field when they feel their own mortality, and situations like this bring that out. It's sobering. It's a really hard thing for really any team to overcome, but if they're going to, and they're going to rally around that kind of thing, it's up to your locker room. It's your leadership, and O'Connell has to spearhead that. He's a great leader. The team believes a lot in him. They have a lot to do, though. That's just a really tough thing to happen. You hate to see it. It just seems like something, a lot of negativity in the NFL in July. A lot of bad things have happened in the NFL in July. Of recent memory, that's the worst in my mind. A lot of people I've talked to have held him in really high regard, and some of them have had conversations with me about him prior to that. I didn't know who he was until the Vikings drafted him. Right. A lot of people really saw good things for him in the future. Great story that just didn't get to end the way that it should have.
Right, and by the way, it's the other driver that's at fault in all this, so if anybody's wondering. And there's the other part, too, about where he's drafted. You can be the 5th-rated tight end in the entire draft, and 27 teams don't need tight ends. So you end up in the 4th or 5th round. So, I mean, it doesn't go hey, he's the 200th pick. Well, you're not the 200th best player. You're just the 200th pick because that's just the way it fell.
Exactly.
Tom Brady will do the 199 chip all he wants. It's adorable, but the bottom line is you got into the league, you made it work.
Drafted where he should have been drafted.
Right. Well, he got into the league, and he made it work.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty well. Last time I checked.
You got to continue to improve, and the idea is more. They put a lot of value in teams. Their philosophy of where they draft players and why is far more complex than people think that it is. They have very strict definitions for what a 4th round pick would be for them, and most of the time, really the difference between a 4th and put it in the 3rd. I know this for sure. The difference between a 1st and a 3rd oftentimes comes down to an inch. This guy's a little bit bigger, therefore he is in a rarer class of athlete. Yeah. He's harder to find. If he doesn't have that, there are more like him in the 3rd round. We would draft him there. We wouldn't draft him in the 1st round. I think Jackson fits a lot of that, and that's why I was floored with the news of Cam Sutton coming right after it, because Cam Sutton was a great example of that. This is a guy that could play inside or outside coming out. Not an elite athlete, didn't have elite size, but nobody said he was not going to be at least a solid pro. And he got a pretty nice extension that he'd be playing on right now, if not for his own mistakes. So, the difference between that initial huge 1st-round check and the security that comes with it is not really that big. They're solid players. Jackson played at Alabama, then he played at Oregon.
Yes,
it's not like he went down to Division III or anything. Right. He had success. He had another opportunity elsewhere, and he got himself into the league. And that's after a point in time. He came from community college. He wasn't really sure if he wanted to keep playing. Something changed in his life, and he put that forward. That's the kind of guy to bet on. That's why the story is just so horrible. Yeah. This would have been a great story. This would have been somebody you want to root for. In life, from everything I've heard about all three of them that were in the car, they were going to a good place. And as you said, to repeat it again, it was the people who died. It was not their fault. To put it mildly, that's all I'll say. Just truly a tragic situation.
Yeah, exactly. Off next week. I mean, I know you're shocked. I'll take a vacation. So I want. I know. I kind of logged some innings here. When a training camp starts, what are you looking for? I mean, I know the stories change from year to year, but it's some basic things that you at least look for to see whether it's true or not when a camp begins.
I think a lot of it is the stuff that can't be reported formally. It's who's playing where. I get that people are going to look for what team he's running with. I mean, you have a certain core group of guys that are going to be out there, and that's going to be your starting lineup. You know that, but what combinations are they putting in? I mean, a lot of this too is indoctrination from covering the Steelers for this long. You don't know what group of offensive linemen they're going to use. They rotate around a lot, and it's not just about the current season. It's about the future. You look at McCormick, the guard that the Steelers drafted. Yep. Third round of this past year. I see him. To connect this with what I said earlier, I see a guy with easy top 50 skills. Mm-hmm. He just displayed those against FCS competition, so that's something that's going to put him down to the third round. He's an NFL starter, and he's probably a starter by next year. For the Steelers, the question is right guard or left guard. Where are they going to put him? Where do they see him? On day one, if he's at right guard, that does not mean he's permanently a right guard. Where would he end up? Because he's probably not going to be a starter this year either. So the question comes down to how they would use him. What do they want to do with him exactly? What's the rotation at center like? I don't think that Zach Frazier necessarily has much competition, but they're not just going to hand it to the rookie on day one either. Not when he was taken in the second round. Maurkice Pouncey was one of the best center prospects we've seen in the last 15 years. Yep. He didn't have the job on day one. Nope. Let him work into it. What are you hearing about how they're moving? What's the buzz like? What's the chatter like? Those things matter in camp. Yes. It's about leadership. It's about the tone that's being set. The kinds of things that they're doing. Then, of course, obviously there's injuries. You start to hear about this guy had surgery in the off season. He's not available right away. You want to follow that kind of thing, but a lot of it too then just kind of comes down to how successful is this unit or that unit. A lot of things to come into it. I guess I wouldn't say I focus on any particular thing except for the grouping of the offensive line, just to get a sense of where they want to see somebody. It doesn't mean that anything is set in stone immediately, especially when you have younger players like they now do on the offensive line. I didn't even bring up the tackles. What are they going to do with the tackles? They've drafted a lot of offensive linemen lately. Mm-hmm. What combinations could they use with the younger guys in concert with the veterans that they have on extensions? A lot of different things to do, and I think that's the future foundation of the team. And that's the easiest thing I'll say the entire day, considering how much capital they've put into it. So what they want to do with that, how they're doing it, and with the new offensive coordinator, I mean, you're not going to necessarily get a whole lot of schematic stuff until you get deeper into camp and really start to see them add on to the playbook, and then preseason games, what they show a little bit of, to break down a little bit of how they want to approach their opponents on offense. I'm looking forward to seeing that. That's the kind of stuff that I would look at overall. But you know, at the end of the day, too, it's about, can guys throw? Can they run? Can they catch? Can they block? Can they tackle? You know, what are we seeing to give us a sense that they're capable of doing that they're ready to do that? What type of shape are they in? How do they look versus last season? A lot of compare and contrast, I guess, to the level that's important. I don't know, but I know I love it. I love August. I love training camp, and I'm looking forward to it coming up here pretty quick.
You did, in the course of the answer, use the expression "set in stone." That's you every Tuesday. So,
you bet.
So
and next week,
except for next week, right?
Which is weird. And I'm trying to remember the last time you took a week off.
So am I. But just for a couple, I've had one 3-day weekend since Christmas, and 2 3-day weekends, including Christmas, in the past year.
Yeah, you definitely need the Tuesday off then. take like a 12-day weekend. Those are fun.
Yeah. My friend, thanks so much. We'll talk in a couple of weeks, all right?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Good to be here, Steve. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing very well, thanks. Your survey is out, where you get responses from the fan base. I went through it. Were there any surprises to you in here?
Yeah, so I've been doing this, I don't know, this is maybe the third or fourth one, the Athletic off-season fan survey, and the thing, Steve, that probably surprised me most was about NIL and the fact that, you know, again, we surveyed over 900 people, so this is not indicative of the entire fan base by any stretch. We know that. But, you know, roughly 28% of the people surveyed did not know the name of the collective or that Penn State had a collective.
Yep.
So I think that's pretty interesting when you kind of look at the NIL landscape. And yeah, I mean, we were surveying people from things like their satisfaction level with James Franklin, which was a 4 out of 5. It was, you know, kind of taking the whole body of work, preseason predictions, stat projections. My favorite part, though, is the write-in section, where I asked people about, you know, what excites them about this season, what concerns them about this season. And I can tell you, Steve, I sat yesterday and sifted through each one of those answers, and some of them really made me laugh. Some of them were really good.
Yeah. There's nothing more entertaining than the comment section. All right, so let's get to a couple of these in there. The number one transfer, shockingly, is at wide receiver. Julian Fleming. He got nearly 60% of the vote. A.J. Harris got 26, Noah Rucci 6.5, Chase Meyer got 5.5, Jalen Kimber got 2%. Okay. Nothing really surprising there.
Yeah, no, for me, that one is the kind of, it's like people are excited about Julian Fleming, right? And to me, Steve, though, I had asked about the top pass catcher and who we think that might be this year. And kind of what I thought might happen there happened, in that I included it, you know, to include the running backs and the tight ends, just because, you know, there's so many questions with the receiving corps. And yeah, the top pass catcher, people thought it could be Tyler Warren, which again is a little unusual, but also kind of makes sense given the circumstances of this receiving corps.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, look, the bottom, James Franklin's talked about this many times. The wide receivers not only have to compete with themselves, they have to compete with the tight ends. If your tight ends happen to be some of your better pass catchers, well, there's a good chance they're going to be the ones seeing the field. You don't just put out 3 guys just to put 3 guys out there. What were some of the comments you received on Drew Allen?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously confidence and excitement with the offense because of Andy Kotelnicki, and there's also still the kind of the question of, just how good is Drew Aller, right? Like, that's the thing fans still want to know, which I think it's pretty telling that we're heading into year 3 with him second as a starter, and we still can't, definitively say, yeah, this guy is, he's X, Y, and Z, just because of all the circumstances and changes that have happened around him. But I think the thing that got me is, people still believe that he is a top 15 quarterback, and they think by the end of this year, they're not saying he's a Heisman finalist, but they're saying he's a top 15 guy, which, I take that as, okay, if Drew Aller is indeed a top 15 college football quarterback, then this offense, it means it's doing well. It means that Penn State should, again, be in that conversation for the playoff. To me, this is a playoff bubble team, and kind of, what constitutes a successful season this year is getting in the playoff, going to satisfy enough people, or does Penn State have to get in and actually win a game in the playoffs to satisfy? And, the latter, the getting in and winning a game, is what most people said they would consider a successful season. Right. So that's, again, there's heightened expectations around here. There seemingly always is. But I think that's kind of a good gauge and an interesting way to look at it, at least.
All right, sampling of stadium renovation responses, the removal of troughs in the men's room, improved Wi-Fi cell service. Beaver Stadium currently is one gigantic dead zone during a game. It'll be nice to be able to check scores of other games and text with friends, family in real time. Ability to host more events than just football. Seeing a concert there would be nice. Seeing a Flyers-Penguins game would be a dream. And then there's this one. The only renovation I get excited about is the lack of traffic after games. All right.
Yeah.
If there's a lack of traffic, they're not playing well.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's like I had to remind people, I was like, there's nothing in the renovation about trying to improve traffic patterns. Like, that is a separate issue. But it is, it's still an issue around here. And, at some point, I think, and this is where Penn State's at, it's like, your location is your location. There's one way in, one way out. It's just kind of the geographic gridlock of where State College is. But, yeah, we know that traffic always gets people riled up, Steve.
But Jack and I think it's good for the post-game show. So.
Oh, I bet. Captive audience.
The Play Fly people were like, we ought to sell more commercials on that thing. All right. What response did you get that's outside of this survey? But just on the thought of the price tag at $700 million, the Wall Street Journal did a piece on it today. And what's been the general reaction that you've heard from fans when you've written about it?
I think the general reaction to the renovation is that people were underwhelmed, and I say that because I think, right, stuff like widening the concourse, improving bathrooms, improving cell service and Wi-Fi, like, that's not sexy, right? Like, that's not the massive Jumbotron, that's not the big brick exterior, that's not all those things. But these are, in some ways, almost like simple solutions to problems that have plagued this facility for a very long time. So I think there's some of that. I do think there's satisfaction with the capacity and the fact that Penn State's committed to having, still one of the biggest stadiums in the country. Now, again, to do that, what are you willing to sacrifice from a comfort standpoint? I've heard a lot from fans that say, hey, we'd rather be more comfortable in our seats, more chair backs, more legroom, all these things. But, yeah, to me, it's been a little bit of an underwhelming thing. And I also think, Steve, some of that is that, as I talk about surveys, there have been so many surveys about the stadium and what to do with the renovation. I think it's the right call. I mean, financially, building a new stadium was not in the cards. Like, you cannot take on that kind of financial responsibility right now in this day and age. I am very curious, though, like, in, I don't know, say 15, 20 years, right, are you still going to have 100,000 plus people willing to come into college football stadiums? Because there's got to be a reason why the NFL does what it does, where you see more of the 70, 80,000.
Yeah.
And I know this place is special, this place is unique, but I just wonder if maybe a little bit less capacity and maybe enhancing, that would maybe help make it more comfortable for people. Because I just, long term, I do wonder, as the comforts of home get better, get nicer, as the cost of, getting here, attending games gets higher, I just wonder at what point do people say, okay, we're not going to commit to this. I don't know.
Right. Well, and tickets being in demand. Yep, that's another part, too. And that's what the NFL does. That's why Buffalo's going to go with a 65,000-seat stadium when their original stadium was 80. Demand. What concerns you most about the upcoming season, right? Okay, I'd get to the part they're excited about, but the more entertaining responses are always in what concerns you.
Always.
The likelihood that Penn State's the 13th team in a 12-team field and can't win a big game. The schedule's much more difficult with the expanded conference. Existential worry over going from number 2 to number 3 to number 4 to 6 in the conference and turning into Iowa. I think we've seen James Franklin's ceiling. How much of Aller's struggles were the old OC and receivers or Aller himself? 6 years since James Franklin's good to great speech, which was meant for the recruits in the room, by the way, and the program seems no closer to winning a national title. If anything, it seems that the program peaked in 16-17, and those 2 years were more of an outlier. Also, in 10 years, it could be argued that the offense still has not been a fully functioning unit. It's a long comment.
Yeah. No, there were, and like I said, I sifted through those yesterday, and that's always the flip side of it. If everything goes well, people are excited, they're energized about the new offense. If it doesn't go well, it's like, oh, kind of here we go again. There's a new OC. Really, how good is the quarterback? Like all those questions. I'm like, I get it, right? It's July, the season's around the corner. These are the kind of conversations that fans are having among themselves. I mean, these are the kind of conversations that a lot of the writers are having amongst ourselves of, hey, what do you really think about this team? Or what are maybe some issues with the schedule or challenges that, or players maybe that we're not talking about now that we should be, or challenges that we don't really see right now that maybe we should anticipate. And this is the full preseason hype, Steve. I love this time of year because we're going to hear it in a couple of weeks at Big Ten Media Days, right? Every coach is excited about their roster. Every coach is happy to be here. Every coach thinks their team's going to win a national championship. But you and I both know, right, the reality is that's not the case for most teams. But Penn State is in that conversation.
Yeah, and there's no question they'll be one of the teams in the conversation. And the bottom line is you can finish third in the Big Ten. You're going to get in the playoff. I mean, the SEC and the Big Ten are each going to get a minimum of 3 in the playoff. I mean, that's because of the strength of schedule. I don't think there's any question about that. So there's more room in all of this to make something happen, but the difference is going to be who you've added along the way. And this is a question I posed to other Big Ten announcers. We had a golf outing back in May. And I said, guys, is finishing 8th good? And they looked at me and they said, well, it depends on circumstances. In other words, say I wasn't doing well and I finished 8th and I've got a better record than last year. Well, if I have the same record and I'm 8th, then no. But I said that's something that has to be considered when you break away from divisions. Is 8th good?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, that I think is like the Penn State point of if you're 10-2 again, right? And you get in the first round and you lose in the first round, that's kind of the same narrative here. I mean, and I think what's going to be interesting, too, is, like, we're all going to have to wrap our head around the fact that, like, especially after the way things have gone here at 10-2, like, 10-2 is different now. Yeah. 10-2 means a little bit more because of the schedule. But also, like, you lose that game in the playoffs, say, right? Your season's done, right? There's no bowl trip. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this whole thing shakes out. But, yeah, I mean, you're right. I think, the conference gets harder, and for Penn State, getting rid of that East Division is wonderful. You're not playing Michigan this year unless, of course, you play them in the playoff. Mm-hmm. You're not seeing Oregon this year, which is also a good break. But you're also not going to play Rutgers and Maryland every year, right? That's the other side of that. Wins are going to be tough. I mean, you're going to USC this year. You're playing Wisconsin. Washington's in a different kind of situation as they rebuild, but They're coming here, I mean, it's going to be fun. I did take away from the survey. Fans are excited to see these other venues and have other teams come here. But yeah, it's just we're on the cusp of this brand new look season, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Of the new teams, which one raises your curiosity?
I think Oregon, just because of right now, kind of the way that I think they're going to roll. I think you look at them and you say, okay, well, if you're Penn State, it was, oh boy, you got Ohio State, you got Michigan, and I would still put Oregon then in that top, that top tier, approaching that top tier. USC, of course, would be the other one for me, that if Lincoln Riley, the quarterback whisperer, can kind of put this thing together, they could be a real problem. But yeah, to me, Oregon is the interesting or most interesting of all of them, and of course they come to Beaver Stadium in 2025. And Steve, shield your eyes, because that could be a real uniform clash.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's. I'll give you a 2015. Penn State played down in Baltimore. I think that was the year.
Mm-hmm.
And Maryland wore the jerseys from 1961.
Yes.
When Dick Shiner and those guys won their game against Penn State. And so I'm doing the pregame, and I'm leading. It's near kickoff. And I said, Jack, Maryland's wearing their throwback jerseys with the red, the numbers on the helmets, the whole thing. He says, Penn State's wearing their throwback road jerseys. I said, wait a minute, Jack, those are Penn State's jerseys.
Yeah. Yeah, the simplicity of it will not settle at Oregon. There will be no simplicity on those uniforms.
No, it's interesting, though. One thing that Paul Keels, who does Ohio State, did a Rose Bowl with Oregon. And this is back maybe about 2010 or something like that. He says, Steve, I couldn't see the numbers. All right, and that it's interesting. They do all that stuff for TV, but if you can't read the numbers, including the fans in the stand, what good is it?
Hey, Steve, the most unpopular take around here. When Penn State had the names on the back of the jersey, it was a heck of a lot easier for the beat writers.
Yeah.
That was like the best thing for us. Is, man, you get the double numbers, you know for sure who it is, especially on special teams. That was a unique era for many reasons, but one of them being I could say with certainty it was this guy and not that guy.
Yeah, well, I'll give you one. When Penn State went final play Neal down. And they run number 5 out there to be the guy in the back, right? Fans thought it was John Dotson. It was Tariq Castro Fields.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it's like you wouldn't know. You just see number 5 on offense, and so you thought it was him.
Yeah, and you're trying to track snaps, and people want to know who's playing on what special teams, and it is. I liked when Penn State, when they put the numbers on the helmet. That's really nice too.
Yeah.
Again, I know fans probably hate that as well, but
no, they love. They love that. Actually, the number thing. The fans liked it because that's what Cappelletti had that. So it's good enough during the Cappelletti era. It's good enough now.
Yeah. So that to me, the generations of greatness. I still remember when they rolled out those uniforms and. We're looking at it, and it was like this big reveal, and we're all thinking it's going to be some crazy alternate. And I just remember leaving there thinking, like, well, that's it. That looks very similar to what we see Penn State wear all the time, But there's subtle changes that people notice. But, the white shoes, the numbers on the helmet, those types of things.
Probably a lot of what you do in the survey confirms your thought process anyway. But how much does it help you form questions when you get to media days because you have feedback from fans of what they're thinking about?
Yeah, it's invaluable, and that's why I do it. It's kind of selfish, right? It's self-serving, and it's one of those where I'm like, I want to know what fans care most about, right? Because that's going to drive my reporting. That's going to drive the story generation this season. What do they care about? And for me, like that's where the NIL thing. I mean, I knew there was a bit of a gap in knowledge and some discrepancies, and you get some of the answers that people are just straight up like, I don't care about the collective, right? I don't know the name and I don't care about it. I'm never going to give to it. But for me, it also kind of highlights that, a lot of people are still really confused about NIL here, and And I know that's like, I didn't need to do a survey for that, but
Right.
it just reaffirms, kind of that understanding of it. And the whiteout stuff is interesting too, of, fans continue to want the whiteout to be at night regardless of opponent, which
Right.
aligns with what, when Penn State did that survey on Twitter a few years ago. And again, they're in a unique spot this year. What do you do with that marquee game? And do you try to do it with Ohio State, even knowing that game probably isn't going to be at night,
Right.
Like that kind of stuff. It just is really interesting to pick the fans' brain for a little bit.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Appreciate great work as always, and thanks for the time you gave us today.
No problem, Steve. Take care.